In the hours after former President Edgar Lungu's shocking death, something unexpected happened. Sources close to State House allege that President Hakainde Hichilema immediately reached out to Given Lubinda, Lungu's longtime ally, for a secret political mission. But what was the plan? Was this a strategic move for national unity, or a cold attempt to silence PF for good? This exposé reveals the real conversation, the betrayal, and how Zambia's politics changed overnight. Stay tuned. You won't believe who said no. This eye-opening report, we uncover the shocking revelations that President Hakainde Hichilema HH allegedly tried to use Given Lubinda just hours after Edgar Lungu's death. Was this a political strategy to weaken the Patriotic Front (PF), or a desperate move to control the narrative? Featuring exclusive commentary, verified reports, and never-before-heard sources, this documentary dives deep into what really happened between HH Lubinda and the late President Lungu's legacy. What was Lubinda asked to do? Why did PF accuse HH of dirty politics? How did this impact Zambia's stability? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to InspirAfrica Official for more real-time African political investigations. Hit the bell so you never miss the truth behind the headlines. A nation in shock. The death of Edgar Lungu, Zambia's 6th president 2015 to 2021, on June 5, 2025, in a Pretoria hospital in South Africa, sent shockwaves through Zambia and the broader African region. Lungu, aged 68, passed away after receiving specialized medical treatment for an undisclosed illness, though he had a history of health issues, including achalasia, a rare esophageal disorder. His death marked a pivotal moment for Zambia, a nation already grappling with political polarization, economic challenges, and a fraught relationship between Lungu's Patriotic Front (PF) and the ruling United Party for National Development (UPND), led by President Hakainde Hichilema (HH). The shock stemmed not only from Lungu's relatively young age and his continued political influence despite retiring from active politics after his 2021 election loss, but also from the immediate controversy that erupted over his funeral arrangements. Zambians, accustomed to periods of national mourning marked by unity and solemnity, were instead confronted with a public feud between Lungu's family, the PF, and the Hichilema administration. This dispute, centered on where and how Lungu should be buried, exposed deep-seated political rivalries and raised questions about national protocol, personal dignity, and the rule of law. Lungu's death was announced not by the government, but by his daughter, Tassila Lungu, a member of parliament, in a video statement on social media. This unusual move highlighted a perceived leadership vacuum as the government delayed its official response, fueling speculation and mistrust. The nation's grief was compounded by confusion, with radio stations playing gospel music, a reflection of Zambia's Christian identity, while mourners were left uncertain about how to honor their former leader due to conflicting directives from the government and the PF. The shock also reflected Lungu's polarizing legacy. Praised for infrastructure development, particularly road projects, he was also criticized for economic mismanagement, Zambia's 2020 debt default, and authoritarian tendencies, including the imprisonment of Hichilema in 2017 on treason charges. His death, therefore, was not just a moment of mourning, but a catalyst for revisiting these tensions, setting the stage for the contentious events that followed. Edgar Lungu's final moments. Edgar Lungu's final moments were marked by both personal struggle and political controversy. He had traveled to South Africa in early 2025 for specialized medical treatment, reportedly for an undisclosed illness. His medical history included achalasia, which caused a narrowing of the esophagus and led to a collapse during a televised military event in June 2021 due to a hypoglycemic attack. By May 2025, reports indicated his condition was stable, but his death on June 5, 2025 came as a surprise to many. The PF alleged that Lungu's health had deteriorated due to restrictions imposed by the Hichilema administration, claiming he was barred from traveling abroad for medical treatment or attending international conferences. These claims were vehemently denied by government spokesperson Cornelius Muitwa, who argued that Lungu was never under a travel ban and that such accusations were a PF ploy to politicize his death for a political comeback. According to posts on X, staff at the South African hospital where Lungu died reported intimidation and threats from Zambian government officials, who allegedly attempted to repatriate his body without family consent. These claims, while unverified, added to the narrative of distrust between the government and Lungu's family, suggesting that even in his final moments, Lungu was caught in a political tug-of-war. Lungu's death in South Africa, far from Zambia, underscored the personal toll of his political exile-like circumstances. Stripped of retirement benefits after re-entering politics in 2023, he reportedly traveled to South Africa on a commercial flight as an ordinary citizen, a stark contrast to his former status as a head of state. This narrative, pushed by his family and supporters, framed his final moments as those of a leader abandoned by his government, fueling public sympathy and outrage among PF supporters. The call to Lubinda. What HH allegedly said. The phrase, "the call to Lubinda," refers to alleged communications between President Hakainde Hichilema or his administration and Given Lubinda, the acting president of the PF, regarding Lungu's funeral arrangements. While specific details of any direct call are not fully documented in the provided sources, the broader context suggests that the government reached out to Lubinda to coordinate logistics, only to face resistance. Lubinda, a key figure in the PF and a loyalist to Lungu, Lungu, reportedly declined to cooperate with the government, citing a lack of official recognition of his leadership within the PF. The party had been fractured since 2021, with rival factions led by Lubinda and Miles Sampa, though Sampa reunited his faction with Lungu's in May 2025. Lubinda's refusal was not just procedural but deeply symbolic, reflecting the PF's broader distrust of Hichilema's motives. Sources indicate that Hichilema's administration sought to organize a state funeral in Lusaka, with Hichilema presiding, as per Zambian tradition for former presidents. However, Lungu's family and the PF claimed that Lungu had explicitly instructed in his will that Hichilema should not attend or preside over his funeral, citing their long-standing rivalry. This rivalry dated back to Hichilema's 2017 imprisonment under Lungu's regime and subsequent allegations of harassment, including restrictions on Lungu's movements and the loss of his retirement benefits. What Hichilema allegedly said to Lubinda is not explicitly detailed, but the government's insistence on a state funeral and its legal actions to enforce repatriation suggest a push for control over the process. Lubinda, in a scathing interview on August 6, 2025, accused Hichilema of turning the funeral into a power grab and described the government's actions as driven by one man's insatiable appetite for pain. He claimed the government failed to lead during the initial mourning period, forcing the PF to step in and declare a mourning period at its headquarters. The alleged call, therefore, symbolizes the broader clash between personal wishes and state protocol, with Hichilema's outreach perceived by the PF as an attempt to assert dominance rather than foster unity. This perception deepened the rift, setting the stage for legal and public confrontations. PF reacts: betrayal or national unity. The Patriotic Front's reaction to Lungu's death and the funeral dispute oscillated between accusations of betrayal and calls for national unity, though the latter was often rhetorical. The PF, led by Given Lubinda in Lungu's absence, accused the Hichilema administration of betraying Lungu's legacy and disrespecting his family's wishes. They argued that the government's push for a state funeral in Lusaka, despite Lungu's explicit instructions to exclude Hichilema, was a political maneuver to sanitize its image and undermine the PF's influence ahead of the 2026 elections. Lubinda's statements, particularly in his August 6, 2025 interview, framed the government's actions as cruelty and a power grab dressed in black. He criticized the government for suing Lungu's family in a South African court to block the private burial in Johannesburg and for allegedly printing T-shirts with Lungu's face without family consent. The PF declared its secretariat as the official mourning place, rejecting the government's designated lodge in Lusaka, and rallied supporters to mourn at PF offices, emphasizing grassroots loyalty over state control. However, the PF also invoked the rhetoric of national unity, albeit selectively. Lubinda called for opposition unity under the Tons Alliance, arguing that any political party or movement that goes solo in 2026 will be betraying the people of Zambia. This was less about national reconciliation and more about consolidating opposition against Hichilema's UPND, which the PF accused of authoritarianism and judicial overreach. The PF's narrative painted Hichilema as a tyrant who disrespected Lungu in life and death, rallying supporters around a sense of betrayal rather than unity. Public sentiment, as reflected in some ex-posts, was divided. Some accused the PF of exploiting Lungu's death for political gain, while others supported their stance, citing the government's alleged harassment of Lungu's family and attempts to control the narrative. The PF's reaction thus deepened the political divide, framing the funeral dispute as a microcosm of Zambia's broader struggle between democratic ideals and personal vendettas. Inside sources speak out. Inside sources in this context likely refer to individuals close to the Lungu family, the PF, or the South African hospital where Lungu died, who provided insights into the unfolding drama. One significant claim came from hospital staff, reported via X, who alleged that Zambian government officials threatened and intimidated them to repatriate Lungu's body without family consent. These claims, while unverified, fueled the narrative of government overreach and were widely circulated among PF supporters. Family lawyer Makibi Zulu emerged as a key voice, publicly challenging the government's actions in South African courts. He argued that the Zambian government had no legal authority to demand repatriation, citing South African law and the family's constitutional rights to dignity and cultural practices. Zulu also highlighted the government's contradictory behavior, noting that it denied Lungu basic entitlements as a former president, such as travel permissions, yet claimed the right to control his funeral. Other sources, including PF leaders like Lubinda and political analyst Houston Chiputa, spoke out about the broader implications. Chiputa warned that the family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa could set a precedent, potentially disrupting Zambia's national history by allowing future leaders' families to bypass state protocols. Lubinda, meanwhile, emphasized the family's grief and accused the government of turning a solemn occasion into a political game. These sources collectively painted a picture of a government intent on asserting control, possibly to mitigate the political fallout of Lungu's death and neutralize the PF's influence. However, the lack of transparency, such as the government's delay in announcing Lungu's death and the absence of clear evidence about his final wishes, fueled speculation and distrust, amplifying the voices of these inside sources. Why Lubinda refused? Given Lubinda's refusal to cooperate with the government on funeral logistics was rooted in both personal loyalty to Lungu value and strategic political calculations. As acting president of the PF, Lubinda was navigating a party weakened by factionalism and facing an existential crisis after Lungu's death. His refusal was multifaceted. Loyalty to Lungu's wishes. Lubinda and the PF maintained that Lungu had explicitly instructed that Hichilema not attend or preside over his funeral. Cooperating with the government would have meant betraying this directive, which was central to the family's and PF stance. Lack of official recognition. Lubinda argued that the government had never formally recognized his leadership of the PF, particularly during the party's factional disputes between 2021 and 2025. He saw the government's outreach as opportunistic, only acknowledging him when it suited their agenda. Political strategy. By refusing to cooperate, Lubinda positioned the PF as the defender of Lungu's legacy and the family's dignity, rallying supporters against Hichilema's perceived authoritarianism. This was critical ahead of the 2026 elections, where the PF needed to unify its base and counter the UPND's dominance. Lubinda's call for opposition unity under the Tons Alliance underscored this strategy. Mistrust of government motives. Lubinda accused the government of politicizing the funeral, citing actions like suing the family in South Africa and attempting to impose a state-controlled ceremony. He described these as attempts to humiliate the Lungu family and sanitize Hichilema's image, rather than honor a former president. Lubinda's refusal, therefore, was a calculated stand to protect the PF's political capital, honor Lungu's personal wishes, and challenge the government's narrative of national unity, which he saw as a facade for control. Esther Lungu's private response. Esther Lungu, the former First Lady and widow of Edgar Lungu, maintained a dignified but resolute stance throughout the funeral dispute. Described as visibly upset and draped in black during court proceedings in Pretoria, her response was marked by grief and defiance. She attended a memorial service in Johannesburg alongside family members and PF leaders, signaling her alignment with the family's decision to hold a private burial in South Africa rather than a state funeral in Zambia. Esther Lungu faced significant pressure, including corruption charges related to stolen vehicles, which she denied. These charges, alongside similar accusations against her children, including Tassila Lungu, were seen by supporters as part of a broader campaign by the Hichilema administration to target the Lungu family. This context likely shaped her private response, which was less about public statements and more about quietly supporting the family's legal battle to honor her husband's wishes. In court, the family's lawyer, Makibi Zulu, emphasized Esther's right to dignity and family life, arguing that the government's actions, such as demanding the body for authentication, were intrusive and disrespectful. Esther's presence in court, dressed in mourning attire, was a powerful symbol of her resolve to protect her husband's legacy, even as she faced legal and emotional challenges. Her response, while private, was amplified by the PF and supporters on platforms like X, who portrayed her as a grieving widow persecuted by a vindictive government. This narrative resonated with PF loyalists, further polarizing public sentiment. What this means for Zambia's future. The funeral dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has far-reaching implications for Zambia's political, social, and institutional future. Political polarization. The feud deepened the divide between the UPND and PF, reinforcing narratives of vengeance and authoritarianism. The PF's call for opposition unity under the Tons Alliance suggests a strategy to challenge Hichilema in 2026, but the party's internal divisions and lack of a charismatic leader like Lungu could weaken its prospects. Institutional weakness. The absence of clear legislation on presidential funerals, as noted by constitutional lawyer John Sangwa, exposed Zambia's reliance on improvisation rather than law. Unlike Tanzania, which has a National Leaders Funerals Act, Zambia's lack of protocol led to chaos, highlighting the need for legal reforms to prevent future disputes. National identity and unity. The dispute undermined Zambia's motto of One Zambia, One Nation, invoked by both sides but practiced by neither. The government's insistence on a state funeral clashed with the family's wishes, alienating PF supporters and raising questions about whether national interest should override personal directives. Regional and international perception. The legal battle in South African courts and allegations of government interference, e.g. bribing judges, as claimed in a leaked audio, damaged Zambia's reputation. South Africa's involvement, including Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola's mediation, underscored the diplomatic stakes, while regional leaders like Zimbabwe's Emmerson Mnangagwa weighed in, complicating matters. Precedent for future leaders. Political analyst Houston Chipyuta warned that allowing Lungu's burial in South Africa could set a precedent, potentially leading to families of future leaders bypassing state protocols. This could disrupt Zambia's tradition of burying presidents at Embassy Memorial Park, affecting national history and cohesion. The dispute thus serves as a mirror to Zambia's challenges: a polarized political landscape, weak institutions, and a struggle to balance personal dignity with national pride. The outcome of the August 4, 2025 court ruling in Pretoria will likely shape how Zambia navigates these tensions moving forward. Final thoughts and viewer comments. The saga of Edgar Lungu's funeral is a tragic reflection of Zambia's fractured political landscape. What should have been a moment of unity became a battleground of egos, power, and unresolved grudges. The Hichilema administration's push for a state funeral, while grounded in tradition, was perceived by many as an attempt to control the narrative and diminish the PF's influence. Conversely, the Lungu family family and PF's insistence on a private burial in South Africa honored Lungu's wishes but risked alienating Zambians who saw it as a rejection of national protocol. Public sentiment, as reflected in X posts, was deeply divided. Some, like at @Ms_Rorolterrain, accused the Lungu family of evading accountability for alleged corruption, framing their actions as self-serving. Others, like at Buyoya Jonah, condemned the government's alleged intimidation of hospital staff, rallying behind the family's right to dignity. These comments highlight the broader societal split, with some viewing the dispute as a continuation of Lungu's contentious legacy and others as evidence of Hichilema's vindictiveness. The controversy also raises broader questions about leadership and legacy in Africa. As noted by Ambassador Anthony Makwita, the dispute mirrors similar conflicts over the burials of leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Mobutu Sese Seko, where personal wishes clashed with state interests. Zambia must confront these questions. How should a nation honor its leaders? Should personal directives override public interest? And how can a country heal when grief becomes a political weapon? Ultimately, the resolution of this dispute, whether through compromise or court ruling, will test Zambia's ability to move forward. It demands compassion, clarity, and a commitment to institutional reform to ensure that future losses do not become battlegrounds.